Welcome to the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. I'm DaRon.
And I'm Roniel. Security assessment versus a penetration test versus a vulnerability assessment versus a risk assessment.
Right.
You have all those different things. And what I've noticed, even as a consulting, you'll see nowadays that the reason why, and this is funny, when we would get a penetration test report that we thought was a penetration test, it would not be a penetration test. And I had come to learn that most consultant or consulting places actually do security assessments than that of a penetration test. So be clear when you're looking at these things and asking that you are clear that whether it's a penetration test versus a security assessment, which are two different things. So that's the difference you're going to see in these areas, that a lot of the time they're moving towards more security assessments than a penetration test. Why? I have no clue.
Yeah.
But there should be.
Do you want to discuss the difference between the two real quickly for everyone?
Yeah, sure. With a security assessment, and this may be a little bit different, different areas, but just say for AppSec in general, I'm going to pick a security assessment for a web app. You're doing a security assessment for a web app. You're pretty much just going. It's, to me, I call it a checklist, like we, had to deal with the other company.
Yeah.
A checklist of things. You're looking at a checklist of things to mark off for that particular client, that whether they're vulnerable or not. And that is as far as you go. You may document the response and the request and the response, and you don't go no further trying to, you may exploit it, but you won't go any further for like post exploitation and none of that stuff to grab data, download sensitive data, none of that. Especially when you come to AppSec, which most people don't get in general, you're probably going to get dummy data.
Yeah.
So you're going to get a test user. You're not going to be doing it an assessment like you would do a network assessment where you're hacking live or testing live users, user account internal. And here you're going to probably have test accounts. Okay. So with that being said, there's no point in some cases, but then in some cases there might be a point. But for security assessments, you're just, to me, I call them checkoffs. You're just checking off each vulnerability, make sure you go through and look, and then you're giving that to the client, or whatever you found, and that's it. You don't have to go as far as really doing any exploitation or post-exploitation at that. Penetration test, however, you're not only, you may have a checklist of things that you may want to look at, but you're actually going to go through exploit those things, and you're going to do some post exploitation and get all of the goodies and try to download them or get them to your attacker server, and then take notes on that and report it to the client. So you get to go a little further with exploitation and post exploitation attacks and different stuff. So you also can get, you'll probably be able to do web shells, different reverse shells, different things that you probably wouldn't be able to do, even if it's more of a live customer or test customer. You get to do those things because they want to see how good their infrastructure or their security posture is. So those are two different, if you ask me, from a that perspective. They are totally different, but some people see them as one and the same, and they're not.
Yeah, I guess some people might mistakenly think of it as a penetration test light, right? So it's security light, LIT.
Yeah.
And the truth is, it really isn't a penetration test. It's much more lacking. Now, I think one of the reasons why people moved in that direction is it's cheaper. And it's cheaper because you don't have to have someone who is able to do that pivoting, who's able to do that post exploitation, or who is able to really grab a lot of data. You just need someone who's able to detect that there is an issue here and then point it out and move on. And it's also faster as a direct result. You get a lot less fixation. But the problem is it hides a lot of vulnerabilities because, as you know, many times in order to successfully pull off one vulnerability, you have to actually leverage another vulnerability. The vulnerabilities where it's just one thing are the ones that are usually the weakest. They do the least damage. It's the vulnerabilities where I'm chaining together, pulling together 2, 3, 4 different vulnerabilities into one ultimate vulnerability, so to speak, because I have to leverage those other ones in order to pull this one off to its full effect. You would not see those in a security assessment.
Right. No, I agree. So, what are your thoughts about the risk assessment and versus vulnerability assessment?
So I think a lot of people are getting confused because number one, they don't seem to understand what these things are supposed to be, and number two, they don't understand where they belong. So a risk assessment is quite simply where I go through and I look at your system and I say, okay, well, based on this data about your system, so it's a public application that has medical data and it interfaces with three separate customers, plus it has a web interface tied to it in addition to actual full-blown clients. It's custom code, blah, 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 blah. Right. So I take all of this and I put it together and I say, okay, well, your threat actors are nation states because it's medical data and they love to have that for a variety of reasons. It's going to be your hacktivists because some of your clients happen to be, I don't know, logging companies, the military, um, police departments, whomsoever has people's ire these days. And it's also going to include all of these other groups, plus your lone wolves, basically people who are in their basement doing whatever, and they're eating pizza, overweight in their mom's basement. You got the image.
Yeah, with the hoodie.
Yeah, right. Smell of Cheetos.
Yeah. I know those types.
People like that, right? So I've identified the kind of individuals who are likely to go after your system, and then I also look at it and I say, okay, well, you're also going to have issues from because where your system happens to be located, flooding and tornadoes and hurricanes because you're in the world's worst place. And there's a volcano next door to. So all these bad things.
A volcano. Really? Oh, they're messed up. Volcanoes. Yeah. Oh, they totally messed up.
That's right. So we put all this stuff together and we say, based on this, these are your threats and these are your risks, right? So you've got a risk of this data loss, personally identifiable information known as PII getting stolen, medical data getting stolen. You put that all together. That is your risk assessment. So your risk assessment doesn't sit there and tell you what vulnerabilities you have. It doesn't tell you anything other in general, the kinds of things that you need to protect against, because you need to protect against people abusing the fact that you have an LDAP server, you have this, or you have that. But there are no vulnerabilities identified. I'm not actually looking for any real vulnerabilities. I'm not doing any of that kind of stuff. Whereas your vulnerability assessment is going through and it's actually looking for, no kidding, real vulnerabilities. And people get confused because they don't understand what a risk is, and they don't understand what a vulnerability is, and they don't understand how this stuff works. Well, with that, we're going to leave off this episode, and I want to thank you all for watching.
Until the next time, don't forget to subscribe to the Roniel and DaRon podcast show and catch you the next episode. Signing off, I'm Roniel.
I'm DaRon.
Have a good one.
Have fun.